Warning: this episode contains graphic descriptions of child abuse and death. Listener discretion is advised.
It makes a watermelon in your belly.
Exactly.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. Well, hello and welcome to the Free Rotation. I am joined here by Bibbles Bobbles Boo.
I'm so fucking tired.
He waves his wand and you do not get pregnant.
No, I got snipped. God bless.
Get it because he's bibbity bobbity boo.
That's pretty good. Biddly bobbly.
We're here with our resident juvenile prosecution expert.
Hey, that's
Becky.
literally
That's
what I do.
literally
That's
true.
my
Oh,
job.
fuck. So you probably hate kids, too.
I don't hate kids, but they do get on my nerves.
No shit.
And there's me, Angie.
Hey, she's our fucking lead director and shit. She's
Hey.
the
Yep.
dopest.
Oh.
You found
lady.
these notes.
Yeah, you did these fucking notes.
I did.
So you get to tell us.
If you mean copy paste.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's what my notes
No.
are.
I believe in you. Tell you. So we're talking about, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about evil children, like a segment of eagle children.
Of eagle children?
Eagles? Oh,
You're
God.
not talking about evil children in the sense of like possessed, like satanic worshiping
They
children.
could have been. I don't know.
Children of the corn.
No. Yes.
Kind
They were
of.
murderous. But kids who kill. And they don't necessarily kill other kids. They just kill.
They're just killers.
He wants you to, Malachi.
Oh shit.
That's some Children of the Corn.
Mm-hmm. Malachi. Remember when I used to play Malachi? I'd be like,
Yeah.
Malachi.
I still do that.
The first kid we want to look at is Lionel Tate. He was born in 1987.
Can I just preface this that I was like, wow, these kids are so old, blah blah blah, and then I realized you had one from 1987, and I'm like, oh wait, we're like the same age.
Most of them are around the 80s. Like there were a lot of evil millennials born. I'm not gonna lie. There was
I'm one of them, so yeah.
It's like I feel like that's what we're gonna call this, evil millennials.
I want to go evil, more chaotic neutral.
This kid to me is really evil. His mother went upstairs to get some rest, left him to watch his, I think, 4-year-old younger sister.
It's useless. It just lays there and cries and shits itself.
But she was babysitting Tiffany, and she went upstairs and left the baby with her son Lionel, who was 14. He was watching TV when she went upstairs.
Yeah.
Now get this. While she was upstairs, she heard a lot of screaming, yelling, and fighting. She didn't go down to check on him. She just yelled down, "Cut that shit out."
Yeah. Typical absent parent.
Yeah. So about an hour later, he goes upstairs and he's like, hey, she's not breathing. So medical examination reported the cause of death was sharp stomping that lacerated Tiffany's liver.
Oh shit!
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah.
Wait, way to go right into it, Angie.
There
yeah.
you go.
The girl also suffered from brain swelling and fractured skull and rib from a beating that lasted from 1 to 5 minutes and 35 other injuries.
Holy shit!
Tate later said that he jumped on her from the staircase.
What the
So
fuck?
So he literally came off the
He
top.
came
rope.
off the top rope on her. But he was so awful. He tortured her. So the yelling and screaming, you got to think that the woman who ignored the screaming from the baby, how excruciatingly painful this was for this baby. And she just stayed upstairs.
Nothing.
Stop it. Leave that baby alone.
I just was gonna take a nappy nap, okay?
In 2001, Tate was sentenced to lifetime imprisonment without parole, but his sentence was overturned as his mental competency was not tested before or during the trial. He was released in 2004 and on 1 year's house arrest and 10 years probation. So I know a lot of people probably think, what's the difference between mental competency and intelligence? Becky, would you like to explain this?
All right. So first off, it is interesting that he did get life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, but that part of that has also been overturned in the later years because children, if you're under the age of 17, they now say that they have to have the right to have the possibility of parole. So the fact that he was even sentenced to that would have been retroactive to begin with.
That's scary because some of these kids, really needed to just die, right? You just execute them.
Real.
They're
Agreed.
useless.
Good thought process.
We'll get into it, but you'll see,
Yeah.
kill them.
But the difference here is when you have a mental competency evaluation versus your actual intelligence. Intelligence is considered a proponent or a component of your competency evaluation. Your competency evaluation is just taking into account whether you understood the difference between right and wrong when you committed the act.
And what the consequences of what you were doing. So maybe in his mind he could come off the top rope and stomp a baby and the baby would be fine because
Right.
he sees it in wrestling, but I don't think so.
Well, and your intelligence, they do consider that because a lot of times lower intelligence is a contributing factor to being mentally incompetent, just because you don't understand the ability from right and wrong.
Yeah.
You don't fully understand.
Yeah, Lionel Tate's dump stat was intelligence.
Yeah,
Dun, dun,
apparently.
sh-
Well, and thinking about like mental competency and intelligence, does violence really need intelligence behind it?
No.
I mean, think about like they call barbarianism, like the idea that you have just a base violence in general. It is kind of screwed up though that, I am curious to see what happened to the mom because she was criminally negligent and not taking care of her child.
Yeah, I didn't put it down because we weren't focused on that aspect, but one of the things I want to look at later is how responsible are parents and their negligence of their kids in this.
I feel like this is like 7 years of my job just coming out right now to talk about.
See? Now,
There you
this
go.
one I threw in because I think this one was...
It's like the complete opposite of what happened.
Yeah, and to me, he was completely... I don't think he did this.
Right.
When you look at his picture, he even looks different from these kids. His name is George Stinney. He was born in 1929. And he was executed on June 6, 1944 at 14 years old.
Jeez.
He was the
Yeah.
youngest person in the U.S. executed in the 20th century. Now, what happened was he was accused of murdering two girls, Betty June Binnicker, 11, and Mary Emma Thames, 8, both white girls. Their bodies were found in a hole full of mud. The girls had severe fractured skulls, which were supposedly inflicted by a railroad spike. In his confession, he said he intended to have sex with Betty, but somehow ended up killing the girls. He was put up for and immediately sentenced to death by the electric chair.
Jesus.
So, I think at the time you think this was 1929, and they never confirmed his confession.
Yeah.
They also
Well, and it's funny. Finish describing it, but we actually studied this in law school. This case.
okay. It was a bunch of circumstantial evidence, and they were poor, working class African American family, and it was suspicious that it was a gross miscarriage of justice, and he was just blamed because he was there.
Yeah. So with this case, it's interesting because a lot of what we see basically later in juvenile justice is based on what happened in this case. So there was a studying which there really wasn't a transcript, but studying the case that happened. Now, if you have a confession or anything like that, you're supposed to be able to have representation like you would. You have to have a parent and somebody to represent
Right, and he
you.
was actually denied representation.
Yes, prior to his confession and then after his confession, he did not have anybody to represent him in this. Second, when this case came out in 2004 for them to reevaluate it, the family actually initially filed a motion for new trial, which basically means he would have gotten a new trial posthumously. I can't ever say
Post-death.
Post-death, whatever. I can say fancy words, but not that.
Yeah.
But
It's posthumously.
posthumously, I can't speak.
Holy shit, Angie. Good for you. You know what? You get a gold star because
Thank you.
can say the big words, but then you'll say shit like eagle and
Eagle children.
And I'm still not mentally competent.
You're mentally competent. It's fine.
But this judge in this case, instead of granting a motion for new trial, she granted what was one of the rarest things you can get, which is an in coram nobis, which basically means that there was such an error of judgment at the time of the case that the entire thing was overturned.
Yeah,
Wow.
because here's the thing. The only circumstantial evidence was he was seen talking to him.
Yes.
That's it.
And his confession, which he did not have representation, and he did not, it was never corroborated.
Right. So they could have said he said anything or beat it out of him. I mean, he was such a young kid. Poor, they probably was like, oh, you know what? You know how you get out of trouble is just say you did it. The thing about George Stinney is he was small for his age.
Yeah.
And to think that he beat to death two girls with a railroad spike who were actually old enough to have fought back.
Railroad spikes are big. Those things
Yeah.
are not easy to swing around.
And two girls, you would think they could have overwhelmed him.
Or run away, you
Yeah.
know.
And if I remember this case correctly, there was somebody who was an actual suspect, but he was deceased as well. So, and it wasn't a child, it was an adult who had been involved in this. But, I mean, if you think about it now, even now you see, if you watch interviews that are recorded, you can see if you're just not the most intelligent person or you're trying to talk to the cops, you can have cops that kind of influence what you say.
Oh, yeah.
Or they beat it out of you. There's a lot of things coupled with this fact that this is the only thing that confession was based on. And, I mean, now you could not put a child to death. It's basically illegal.
It's horrible.
It's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a point where children, and not this guy, I don't think he did this at all, but where they just really don't understand
Their consequences,
Yeah.
their actions.
We can talk about that too. There's a lot of juvenile justice reform based of your understanding of the law as a child.
Yeah. And there's a couple of cases in here where actually some laws in the UK were made stricter because of one kid.
Yeah.
Because he ended up getting out, and of course, he's evil.
Yeah.
So they had changed the law because he was going to get out, and they wanted to make sure that he ended up going right into prison.
Right.
So the next guy we're going to talk about is Craig Price. He was born in 1974. Now, he was deemed a serial killer at the age of 13.
Holy shit.
That's intense. Now that's a
Yeah, you want to talk about absolutely evil. He was arrested in 1989 for 4 murders committed in his neighborhood. Now, he also killed his direct neighbors. I'm talking about like on
That's
the
Oh,
sides
yeah.
of him.
It's like, oh, you're across the street from me?
Yeah,
You did.
he literally went next door and killed a woman in the neighborhood.
That's not the big brain play.
No.
No.
Well, it's a kid.
True.
So he ended up killing a woman and her 2 daughters and another woman in his neighborhood. He also had an existing criminal record for petty theft. He calmly confessed to his crimes for his 16th birthday. He calmly confessed and then said, just wait till I get out and see what I do.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, he said he would make history. So he committed his first murder at the age of 13 in Rhode Island. He broke into a home that was only 2 houses away from his, where he took a knife in the kitchen and stabbed 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer 58 times.
Holy shit.
That's aggressive.
So they thought it was someone else. They had looked at him at first, but they couldn't prove it.
Right.
And they were hung up on this other suspect, but they ended up proving that the other guy didn't do it because he failed.
A lie detector?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then he had an alibi, so they're like, well, I don't know what to fucking do.
Yeah.
A little over 2 years later, when he was 15-year-old freshman in high school, he murdered 3 other neighbors. He was high on marijuana and LSD, stabbed 39-year-old Joan Heaton 57 times, her 10-year-old daughter Jennifer 62 times, and crushed the skull of Heaton's 8-year-old daughter Melissa and inflicted 30 stab wounds. Ooh. They were so brutal that the handles of the knife broke off, and the knives were stuck in them.
Oh, my God.
They ended up catching him this time because there was blood on the scene, and he ended up having deep cuts in his hands.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
I imagine if you're stabbing somebody that you're probably hitting yourself a couple of times, and they're probably fighting back as hard as they possibly can.
Yeah.
But can you imagine, like, okay, how big this kid was that he could...
Oh, he was huge. He was a football player.
Yeah.
I think it said he was an offensive or defensive lineman. He was a big guy.
I mean, think about it. Like, how do you fight back to somebody who's, like, almost mature to the age of an adult?
Because at the time, the brutality was mostly unknown due to the sealed records. Like, people didn't really know everything he did. But according to law enforcement officials, he had no remorse when confessing. And as for the motive, he himself believes racism by whites as a young child was a factor, citing that the first time he wanted to kill people was when a group of people drove by him and yelled racist slurs at him. But here's the thing. He killed women and kids.
Yeah.
That's a cowardice murder. That's a powerful thing.
Yeah. Now, let me get this. Was he tried for the first murders first as a minor, and then...
He confessed to the other killing while confessing, and they had trapped him for these.
Okay.
So they could only link him to the first one by his own confession.
Okay, but he was tried as a minor instead of an adult.
Yes.
What?
While he was, and what I didn't put here, because we're only talking about their childhood murders, when he was in prison, he had so much violence, assaults, that now he's added like 25 years. So he's moved on into prison.
So he basically
he would have been released at 21. But
yeah,
so we don't have to worry about him out soon.
I was about to say, here's the good thing about where we live in Georgia. If you commit any of the 7 deadlies, which is murder or anything like that, you're automatically tried as an adult. You can't not be tried as an adult. The only time that happens is if it's something that's going to be a lesser crime that can be transferred back to juvenile court.
I got you.
Okay, now this one it's crazy. So this is Joshua Phillips, born 1984. Crazy millennial. No.
Thanks.
He was born in Jacksonville, Florida in 1998.
He's already from Florida. That's a problem.
He wasn't born. In Jacksonville, Florida on November 3rd, 1998. Maddie Clifton disappeared. Now, before we talk about this, I'd like to give some background information. His father was a drug addict and an abuser. Mm-hmm. And one of Philip's first memories was seeing like going up to his parents' bedroom when they were fighting, and his dad had punched the wall so hard trying to hit his mom, his fist was stuck in the wall.
Oh my God. So
he had very strict rules for his son. One of which was, don't ever have company over or I will beat you to death type thing.
Okay.
Well, that social interaction probably was very lacking for him.
Yeah, just a bit.
So Maddie Clifton disappeared, and the first one suspected, again here, was a neighbor who passed polygraph but had an alibi. So I'm wondering, how do these people just feel so guilty because they're pedophiles that they just register guilty to stuff?
Yeah.
Because maybe he had thoughts about her or something. Like, that's just strange to me. After a week, the police decided to call off the search, which included over 400 volunteers, one of which was Joshua Phillips. And the FBI came in and they offered a big reward for it. So one day after this happened, like 7 days after the search was called off, Josh Phillips left for school and his mom went to clean his room. Kind of had a funky
Wait,
smell.
did he fail? Wait, did the first guy fail his alibi or his lie detector test or pass it?
He failed it.
Oh, he failed it. Okay.
But he had an alibi.
Oh, okay. Because you said he passed his lie detector test.
Oh, he failed it.
That's why I got confused. I was like, oh man. Okay.
Yeah, so while cleaning his room, she noticed a wet spot under the bed. So she looked under the bed and noticed he had duct taped the underside of the bed together. When she pulled the duct tape off, the little girl's rotting body fell out.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So since the
Gross.
police were still in the neighborhood and the FBI, she just ran across the street to their barricade and was like, "Hey, my son killed that kid."
Wait, so he duct taped the dead body to under his bed
Yeah.
and didn't think anybody would notice.
I guess not.
That's some fucked up shit right there.
Yeah. He stated that the event happened when he was home alone and Maddie came by wanting to play with him. So they were out in the backyard playing baseball, like throwing the ball and just hitting it, and she threw it and he hit the ball and hit her in the eye. Now this happened to me actually when I was a kid.
Oh, you got murdered?
Yeah. No, I was in a
You look
foster
great
home.
for being dead.
Yeah.
Well, I was in a foster home and I was outside playing with their son. He threw the ball at me and I hit it, and it hit him right here in the eye, and it completely did a J cut right here.
Ooh.
I thought I was done for. I mean, I didn't go kill somebody
Right.
to make it right, but I was just like, well, that's it for me. But I do know that these type of things happen. I can say that this is an unusual story.
Yeah.
Well, she was crying and screaming and bleeding because she was a bit younger than him.
Yeah.
But his dad had said, remember, don't have any visitors.
Yeah.
So he was trying to get her to shut up, stop crying, and he's like, what am I going to do? You know, I'm not supposed to have visitors. My dad's literally going to kill me. So in his efforts to quiet her, he killed her.
Oh, so
Yeah.
instead of having a parent that's like, hey, report this to us
Yeah.
and we'll help,
Because
he ended up murdering the girl.
He panicked. She was bleeding, screaming, crying, and knowing that his father would be home soon, he decided to drag Maggie into the house, where he proceeded to strangle her with a phone cord. And for approximately 15 minutes. So you kind of start to wonder about the accidental shit.
Oh.
And then after that, he hit her again with the baseball bat and stuffed her under the base of his bed. When his dad returned home, he went to interact with him for a while and just returned to his room. When he discovered that Maddie was still alive, moaning under his bed, he then removed the mattress and stabbed her 11 times.
Wow.
So at first you're like, oh, his dad's so abusive, he panicked. But then there was a series of...
Yeah.
There's a series of
Events.
decisions that led to you.
that he could have changed, like, at 3 points.
Right.
And she was missing her shoes, pants, and underpants, although there was no sexual findings. And he said that it wasn't about sex, that her clothing fell off as he pulled her to the house.
Did they ever find all of that?
It didn't say if they did.
Is that why they had thought the initial guy who was the suspect had been the one who did it? Because he
found her underwear and pants and stuff.
Well, he had been like, charged with like sexual assault shit and
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah.
Okay.
So Phillips' trial was held in Polk County, Florida, and he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So this was he was 14.
Yeah.
He's not eligible for the death penalty since he was under 16 when he committed the murder. So yeah, they didn't reveal any sexual assault.
I'll be curious to see if they do a retroactive conviction on him, because it has been, like I said before, it's recently been found unconstitutional to have a kid on a sentence of life without parole.
Well, he says that, you know, his fear of his alcoholic and abusive father is what drove him to do this. And so while in prison, he ended up obtaining a paralegal degree, and he helps assist other inmates with their appeals. And he says if he could do it all over again, he wouldn't do what he did. Who wouldn't say that, though?
Well, who wouldn't say well, I mean, there are people who are kind of nutty buddy that would probably not say that either. But
can you imagine it being his mom and finding that? Now, the ladies at work, when this came up in conversation, because this was like a documentary that came out, and he was one of them. And one lady was like, I would never, tell on my kid like that. I would just hide the body
That's fucking
and help him
stupid.
move on with his life.
are you serious?
And another lady was like, if you loved your kid, you would turn his ass in.
Absolutely. Like you have destroyed somebody else's life in protecting your own child's life.
And then went along like, he knew she was dead there.
Right.
And he slept on top of her every night, dead.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta want, and the thing is, it's not, at some point, if he had I hate to say this, but if he had just killed her, left her there, and then that's what he confessed, he probably would have had more sympathy because of his abusive father than trying to strangle her for 15 minutes, sticking her under the bed, and then stabbing her.
11 times. And also, how incompetent of a freaking killer are you?
Well, how old was he? 14?
Yeah.
And and if he's saying that the reason why he did it was because he was scared of his father, how do you...
Yeah.
You're not really prepared to murder, I guess, is really what it is. Although, if you've seen violence, you probably are thinking that. Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, each of these child killers have a different backstory. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to focus on that too for our discussions. What do we think was assisted? Are they just evil, or are they products of their background?
Mm-hmm.
So the next one is Eric Smith, born 1980.
Another millennial.
Yeah.
The 90s had a lot of bad kids.
Yeah. So at 13, he was subjected to a lot of bullying. He had thick glasses, freckles, red hair, and he had elf ears, which was long elf ears because his mom was on epileptic medicine and it caused deformities.
Oh, shit.
He wasn't a bad-looking kid.
No.
He just was unusual looking.
He was unusual looking, and he was in middle school.
So on August 2nd, 1993, when he was 13, he was riding a bike in a summer day camp, and he just happened to see 4-year-old Derek Roby walking alone to the same camp. 4 years old, walking by himself to camp. Just want to point this out.
The 90s were a weird time.
Yes.
So Smith saw Roby and lured him into a nearby wooded area. There he strangled him, dropped a large rock on his head, undressed his body, and sodomized him with a tree limb.
What? Oh, shit. That took a lot different turn.
Yeah. So the cause of death was determined to be the blunt trauma to the head with contributing asphyxia. Around 11 a.m., Roby's mother, Doreen, went to the park to pick up her son, only to find that he hadn't arrived yet. After 4 hours of investigation, Roby's body was found. The murder case made national headlines largely due to the age of the killer and the age of the victim, 13 and 4.
Right.
On August 8th, he confessed to his mother that he murdered Derek. The Smith family informed law enforcement later that night. At his 2014 parole hearing, Smith said that he had been bullied by older children at school and also by his father and older sister. He confessed that he took out his rage on Roby, so he killed him. Smith said that he sodomized Roby with a stick in order to ensure his death.
Jesus.
So this entire product of murdering an innocent 4-year-old was because he was being bullied.
Well, the psychiatrist for the defense said he had explosive rage disorder.
Interesting. Okay. I've never heard of that, but sure.
I may have those words wrong, but basically he gets so full of pent-up rage that it explodes in these violent psychotic episodes.
Okay.
So I guess when we think of bullying and the consequences, a lot of people internalize that rage and end up committing suicide, because what is suicide other than an act of rage against yourself?
Yeah.
But for him, it was this rage at this other kid. But I can understand that. But what did a 4-year-old do to you? Maybe it was a power thing. But then to sodomize him with a tree branch?
Well, and that's what I was thinking is maybe what his whole mentality was, that he was so used to being the submissive, bullied person that he finally was like, I'm going to take it out on somebody who is as helpless as I can be during a time in which I'm bullied.
Yeah. Okay, this kid right here. Graham Young, born 1947.
The older ones are the ones that are scary, like the old timers.
Yeah. This kid is psychotic. Okay, he was known as the teacup poisoner and later became the St. Albans poisoner. From an early age, he was fascinated with chemistry, specifically poisons.
I'm shocked by this name and that he's fascinated with poison.
Yes.
Yeah.
He idolized murderers such as Adolf Hitler, William Palmer, and Dr. Halle Crippen, among others. He began experimenting with poisons at the age of 14 and started buying chemicals in the name of a school experiment. In 1961, he started to test poisons, including antimony, on his family, enough to make them violently ill. So then, beginning in February, his stepmom started having excruciating stomach pains, explosive diarrhea, uncontrollable vomiting. Then it just seemed like his whole family got it. So at first the thought was, oh, we've got an illness.
You got a bug, yeah.
Especially when he took a little bit himself to make himself sick.
Yeah.
Well, his stepmom ended up dying.
Okay. Well, yeah.
So, Winfred, well, here's the thing. So his sister at one point received a cup of tea from him, and it was so bitter she threw it out. When she was on the bus, though, she started having hallucinations, and they determined she had been dosed with belladonna. If she had drank even another sip, it would have killed her.
Right.
So his dad was like, hey, are you poisoning us? Are you doing some weird shit with that chemistry? And he's like, no. She was making shampoo. and poisoned herself. She drank from her shampoo cup.
Yeah, because sometimes
Yeah.
you just decide to drink shampoo. It just is
So
a
here's
thing.
the thing. His
It
dad
smells so good, though.
knew.
Yeah.
Like, at this point, he's poisoning you.
Yeah.
Did his dad get sick too?
Yeah.
Oh, so everybody is sick, and they're like, isn't this kind of suspicious that we're all sick and he's not as
And
sick?
he has a shit ton of poisons and chemistry sets, but it's fine. Well, on Easter Sunday, his stepmother Molly died from poisoning, and shortly afterwards, his father became seriously ill, where he was told that he was suffering from antimony poisoning, and one more dose would have killed him. His aunt, who knew of his fascination with chemistry, and he had a science teacher who was like, you know what? This kid does an awful lot of weird science experiments. He checked his desk at school and found all the poisons.
Oh my God.
So they turned him in, and he was sent to a psychiatrist who recommended contacting the police. So the remains of his stepmother couldn't be analyzed because she had been cremated, which, by the way, was suggested by him.
Oh, he suggested that?
Yeah. And at the time of her death was not treated as suspicious, but rather complications from a traffic accident.
Jesus.
Wait. How did
Yeah.
they get to traffic accident?
Don't know. I guess she had been
I guess
injured
she had been
in an
in it,
accident.
and
And they're
that-
like, you know what? Her intestines are twisted.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it couldn't possibly be the kid with all the chemistry sets.
Nope.
So he was detained under the Mental Health Act in Broadmoor Hospital, an institution for patients with mental disorders who have committed offenses. He was assessed by 2 psychiatrists prior to his trial and was diagnosed as suffering from personality disorder, schizophrenia, and he was also suggested that maybe he was on the autism spectrum. His detention was subject to special restrictions, meaning that subsequent discharge, leave of absence, etc., would have to be approved by the Home Secretary. So remember, this is in the UK. These are a lot of... So the hospital order initially stipulated that he should be detained for at least 15 years. But later they noted the index of offenses for someone found sane carried a sentence of no more than 7 or 8 years. So they couldn't keep him for 15. He was released after 9 years, fully recovered. In June 1970, after nearly 8 years in Broadmoor, Edward Udgen, the prison psychiatrist, wrote to the Home Secretary to recommend his release, announcing that he's no longer obsessed with poisons, violence, and mischief. However, in the hospital, he had studied medical texts, improving his knowledge of poisons, and continued experiments using inmates and staff, one of whom died.
So wait, he was still like doing shit to these
Yes,
people?
he was still poisoning people. It was rumored that his knowledge of poisons was so much that he could extract cyanide from laurel bush leaves.
Jesus.
Like, he was still poisoning people.
This guy could have worked for the government. Like,
Well, I stopped
working on-
here because he's no longer a kid.
So did he go back to prison?
Yeah.
Okay.
He ended up dying there.
Yeah. He probably was meant to.
Continuously poisoning people.
Well, at that point, it's kind of like there's like, you know how they always talk about there's like one path that you can take that changes your whole life. Think if he had like used this for good.
Yeah, like if he had focused on healing people instead of poisoning people.
Or yeah, looking at like how to treat people
Yeah.
for poison or using poison as a way to like.
This is just one of those people you think, this guy was just born evil.
Yeah.
Like, why
Yeah.
poisoning?
Agreed.
And then it's like, so here the parents, knowing that he was probably guilty for this and just letting it continue, like, how much of a blind eye do you turn?
Well, and then it's like it's a nepotism at its finest kind of thing. Like you're so delusional that your child is not evil that you just whatever, no biggie. You know,
Yeah.
your wife dies
Mm-hmm.
from complications with a traffic
Yeah,
accident, but it's
you
not
know what?
suspicious.
Not suspicious. Not to the dad.
No.
And maybe it was because he was poisoned to the point that he wasn't thinking clearly.
That's
Yeah.
probably what it was.
So these next two, I mean, this one really hurts my heart. It's John Venables and Robert Thompson, both born in 1982. But CCTV showed evidence from the Newstrand Shopping Center in Bootle taken on Friday, 12th February 1993, showed the two of these, they just casually were observing children all day. They were playing hooky from school, which is something they did on the regular.
Yeah.
They would go to this mall and just watch kids. So today they stole like some blue paint, a troll doll, some sweets, some batteries, and some various other items that were later found at the murder scene. Okay. So they clearly linked these kids to it because everything they stole was pretty much at the murder scene.
Yeah.
One of the boys later revealed that they were planning to find a child to abduct, lead him to a busy road, and just push him in front of a car.
Oh, sounds fun.
Yeah. So that same afternoon, this kid named Bulger from nearby Kirkby to the Newstrand Shopping Center. She went to the butcher's shop, and while she was talking to the butcher, he wandered off.
Yeah.
Like, happened in seconds. So she and the butcher said she literally turned around after like 40 seconds. He was gone.
Yeah.
Well, because he'd seen these two boys in the door. Hey, come here.
Yeah.
And so he went over to see what they wanted, and they took him by the hand saying they were going to play with him, and they let him right out of the shopping center. It just gets worse and worse. So they took him to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal around a quarter of a mile, and where they dropped him on his head, and he suffered injuries to his face. Like, they literally held him up and just dropped him straight down. So get this, an eyewitness, I was like a fucking eyewitness, said that they saw him with the kid, and the kid was crying his eyes out. So remember, he's got injuries. He's bleeding.
Yeah.
They said that more than 43 people saw these two boys with this kid, and nobody stopped them.
Are you serious?
Nobody. Only 2 people even questioned him, like, hey, why is that kid crying? Oh, he's our brother, and he fell. Hey, why is that kid crying? Oh, he's lost. We're taking him to the police station. 43
At what point
people.
you're like, as an adult,
Because
you're like,
they
well,
followed them with CCTV and were able to see all these people. Just ignore them.
Well, at some point you think that if as an adult you'd say, okay, do you want help? As an adult, I think I can help you. Do you want blah, blah, blah? You know what I mean?
And it gets better because at one point they took him into a pet store where they were ejected because the kid was crying so hard. So eventually they arrive in the village of Walton. As they go in, there's a police station across the road, so they're like, you know what, let's just go here to the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
When they took him to the railroad tracks, they led him up a steep bank. From there, they began torturing him. One of the boys threw the blue paint in his eye. They kicked him, stomped him, threw bricks and stones at him. Batteries were placed in his mouth, and according to police, some were inserted into his anus.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, the boys dropped a 22-pound iron bar described in court as a railway fish plate on Bulger. He sustained 10 skull fractures as a result of the bar striking his head.
Wow.
Alan Williams, a case pathologist, stated that Bulger suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be isolated as a fatal blow.
Oh.
Poor kid. I hate kids, and I ain't gonna kill him.
Well, and some of them don't deserve shit like that.
No.
Not especially because this kid didn't do anything but other than be trusting. That was the problem. Thompson and Venables laid Bulger across the railway tracks and weighted his head down with the rubble in the hope that a train would hit him and make his death appear to be an accident, which that's fucking stupid as shit. Yeah. After they left his scene, his body was cut in half by a train. Oh my God. Bulger's severed body was discovered 2 days later on the February 14th. A forensic pathologist testified that he had died before he was struck by the train. Thank God. That would have been the worst. Like, after all that shit you could have dealt with. Mm-hmm. The police suspected that there was a sexual element to the crime since Bulger's shoes, socks, and trousers and underpants had been removed. The pathologist's report, which was read out in court, found that Bulger's foreskin had been forcibly pulled back. Ugh. When Thompson and Venables were questioned about this aspect of the attack by detectives and the child psychiatrist, Eileen Vizard, the pair were reluctant to give details and also denied inserting some of the batteries into Bulger's anus. At his eventual parole, Venables psychiatrist Susan Bailey reported that visiting and revisiting the issue with John as a child and now as an adolescent gives no account of any sexual element of the offense, which, to be fair, if they're doing all this shit, it could have just been, they could have blacked out.
It could have just been part of the violence.
Yeah, something. The police did quickly find low-resolution video images of Bulger's abduction in Newstrand, in the Newstrand shopping center by the 2 unidentified boys. And the railway embankment upon which his body had been discovered was adorned with hundreds of bunches of flowers. The family of one boy who was detained for questioning but subsequently released had to flee the city due to threats by vigilantes. Vigilantes. I would say my word all fancy. The breakthrough came when a woman, on seeing slightly enhanced images of the 2 boys on national television, recognized Venables, who she knew had played truant with Thompson that day. She contacted the police and the boys were arrested. They were found guilty on November 24th, 1993, making them the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. They were sentenced to detention during Her Majesty's pleasure until a parole board decision in 2001 recommended their release on a lifelong license aged 18. In 2010, Venables was sent to prison for breaching the terms of his license and was released on parole again in 2013. In November 2017, Venables was again sent to prison for possessing child abuse images on his computer. So nothing changed.
Nothing changed. And it was because of these 2 that a law was made that if something was this grotesque, that it would be reviewed whenever at their release to see if they continued on prison, because this guy just continued hurting people.
Yeah, his whole entire life. And I mean, at some point, this is a prime example of why children should be tried as adults in certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like that one kid who allegedly hit the kid in the eye and strangled her out of fear. Yeah. Okay, there is a level there. These kids premeditated
Oh, yeah.
an abduction and
Yeah.
murder and tortured this kid until he died.
And it said that it was common for them to commit truancy.
Yeah.
So, where's the parents? Where's the authorities?
Right.
Yeah.
Where's the
agree.
school in this?
Mhm.
Like, you know, these kids follow the same pattern, truancy at this mall.
Yeah.
Like,
It's fucked.
and then all the people who saw these kids with this crying kid. Like, I've been with Becky before, and we saw a kid crying, and I said, "Are you okay? Like, are you okay? Is somebody hurting you?" Because you just never know.
Right.
And he's like, "Oh yeah, remember he was with his brothers and sisters
Yeah.
and stuff." But you always ask the question. Sure, you might look like a dildo to the people there.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Why is that kid crying?
And well, why isn't the question being asked to the child who's in pain?
Yes,
like,
he's 4. He can answer.
yeah, say, "Are you okay?" Or he could start screaming about his mommy. Okay, well, we need to find your parent.
Exactly.
He's like, "Let me help you to the police station."
And why are you with 2 other kids? Like, where is
Yeah.
your parent in
Yeah.
all this?
And let me
Agreed.
tell y'all, the CCTV of these 2 holding his hands and leading him out is so heartbreaking because this kid he didn't have a reason not to trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't blame his mom for getting distracted in the butcher shop because, you know, it shows her within less than a minute looking everywhere for him.
Yeah.
Where is he?
Yep.
And you would think on this high alert, and, you know, maybe this was before Amber Alerts. I don't even
Yeah.
know if the UK has Amber Alerts.
I don't think they do.
But there's kid missing, like, from this mall, and I guess they just didn't think 2 other kids took them. But why are 3 kids, one of who's 4, on a school day walking around town?
Yeah, and nobody's
And
questioning
they're on
that.
the boardwalk by the
Yeah.
canal where there's tons of people, and nobody thinks to ask a question? Well, why aren't you 2 in school?
Yeah. Agreed.
Where's your parents here?
Yeah.
Well,
It's fucked.
yep. The next one is Jesse Pomeroy, born in 1859.
Okay, we're going way back in time now.
Way back.
We're going back. And this is one of those just evil people. He was born in Charlestown, Massachusetts from 1871 to 1872. There were reports that several young boys were individually enticed to remote areas and attacked by a slightly older boy. However, no one was ever arrested. The attacks were noteworthy because of the extreme amount of brutality used by the assailant. The young boys were beaten with a fist and a belt, and at least 2 of the attacks a knife. Some of the boys were physically scarred permanently. I think his parents must have been onto it because she moved.
Yeah.
So his mom, Ruth, and him and his brother, they moved to South Boston. However, his attacks on boys continued, and he was finally arrested and his case heard in front of a juvenile court judge. He was later found guilty and sentenced to the State Reform School for Boys in Westboro, Massachusetts, for his minority, which at the time meant until he turned 18. However, in February of 1874, at the age of 14, he was paroled back to his mother for good behavior. His mother ran her own dressmaking shop, and his brother Charles sold newspapers. However, in March of 1874, he's been out a month, a 10-year-old girl from South Boston named Katie Curran went missing. On April 22nd, the mutilated body of the 4-year-old Horace Millen was found on the marsh of Dorchester Bay. Immediately, the police detective sought out Pomeroy despite lacking evidence implicating him in a crime.
But they just knew he bad.
They knew
Yeah.
he did it. Like, this was his MO. Of course, now he's escalated to murder.
Right.
The body of Katie Curran was found later in the basement of Pomeroy's mother's dress shop. Her remains were hastily and just carelessly concealed in an ash heap. Jesse Pomeroy was sentenced to life imprisonment, making him the youngest human convicted of first-degree murder in the history of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Wow.
Way to set yourself a precedent.
Yeah, no kidding. And he ended up, he was, at first they had said that he wasn't smart enough to understand,
Yeah.
but this guy was incredibly smart. He tried to escape so many times in the most, like,
Insane ways.
yeah, but like super intelligent. One time he was going to reroute a gas line, and unfortunately when it blew the wall out, it also hit him in the eye, cost him in his eye. Like, he was insane, but in a super intelligent way,
Yeah.
like Lex Luthor type way.
Yeah.
Okay, now this girl right here, Mary Bell, born in 1957. As a child, aged 10
Not
to
a
11.
millennial, just FYI.
No, she's
A fucking boomer.
She is
She's
a
something.
boomer.
In 1968, she strangled to death 2 young boys in Scotswood, a district in the west end of Newcastle upon Tyne. She was convicted in December 1968 of the manslaughter of Martin Brown, age 4, and Brian Howe, age 3. On May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, she strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in a derelict house. She was believed to have committed this crime alone, but between then and a second killing, she and her friend Norma Joyce Bell, not related, age 13, broke into and vandalized a nursery in Scotwood, leaving notes saying, "Hey, we did this," but they just dismissed it as a prank.
Are you serious?
They not only agreed to the vandalism, but Mary Bell agreed to confessed to murdering that kid.
So they
had
didn't
it.
follow up anything.
Yeah, another thing where it's just kid statements.
Yeah, kid statements. If a kid tells me they murdered somebody, I'm not gonna like.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna be like,
Oh, that's a funny joke. LOL.
listen here, Damien, get the fuck away from me.
Exactly.
On July 31st, the two girls took part in the strangulation death of 3-year-old Brian Howe on Wasteland in the same Scottswood area. But police say Mary Bell later returned to carve an M into his abdomen and used scissors to cut off some of his hair, scratch his legs, and mutilate his genitals.
Okay, well that takes a whole new turn.
Yeah, and then it's like, she mutilated his genitals. So then you start thinking that maybe there's some trauma to her.
Yeah.
Turns out there was. Her father, she believed her father was Billy Bell, but she was actually 2 years old when her mom married him.
Mm-hmm.
But he was arrested for armed robbery. Her mom was a piece of shit, sold her into prostitution, but from the time she was 2. She had sex for the first time at 4.
Jesus
Like, she was
Christ.
just horrifically abused. Also, Betty didn't want the baby when she first had her, so she did a series of things to try and kill her. She dropped her on her head from a window.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying she sustained damage to,
Her brain.
like
Oh,
a decision-making area of your brain.
Yeah.
And she also fed her sleeping pills as candy to try and make her overdose and kill her, and that almost worked. But somebody was like, "Are you giving that kid sleeping pills? That's not candy."
Yeah.
Mary says she was subjected to repeated sexual abuse from her family and from the men her mother brought into the house. So she had damage to her decision-making area.
The prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she said that, she didn't quite understand why she did what she did. She ended up going to prison. She was released in 1980, and she's lived under pseudonyms because there was also a law change because of her, too.
Yeah.
That granted, like, an anonymity to kids whenever they come out so they're not constantly followed. So she was later retroed to where it would be her lifetime and in perpetuity, so people knew her name, but now they don't know what her pseudonyms are.
Right.
Because she ended up being found by the Globe, and when they found her, they also outed her daughter.
Yeah.
So now it's also been retroactively applied to her grandchild, so that nobody will ever follow her, and we've lost her.
So she basically went out. She was not one of these that after she got out of prison kept doing other things.
No.
She actually went off to.
Mm-hmm.
She probably was treated.
The authorities track her. They know where she is,
Yeah.
and her daughter and her granddaughter. But she was treated while there. She understood what she did. They were able to help her with her brain damage. And she said that, it's like a different person did that. It kind of reminds me of that little girl in that Netflix documentary where they adopted her at 2 and they didn't realize that she had emotional dissociative disorder.
Yeah.
And she just didn't feel anything. And she was always trying to kill them and their son.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I can't remember the name of
the
it.
basis of Orphan, but it turned out she was like an old, actually like a 40-year-old
Yeah, she was
woman.
the old lady.
Yeah.
But that's probably based off that. And I wish I could remember that name of the documentary because when you first hear it, you're like, this little girl is fucking evil. But she was born addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
And she didn't have any attachment to her mom or dad. Like, they abandoned her.
To me, not just with adults or not with just children, but adults, I think you see that a lot of what perpetuates the violence, there's a lot of behavioral disorders. You see a lot of mental health disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it's not a lot better in the United States, by example, seeing like kids who do still murder. I mean, think about the Slender Man girls.
Yeah,
Right.
that's messed up.
And one thing I didn't put on here was kids who killed in schools.
Yeah.
Or theaters, because that's just a different...
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, but I think the laws have, especially in Georgia, it does a good. Surprisingly, considering it's almost impossible to understand juvenile justice reform in Georgia, it does a good job of trying to protect people from children. Because if you see here, a lot of times what's happening is you have kids that are being let out because they're minors.
Mm-hmm.
Like you murder somebody, but you tried as a minor. You can't do that here.
Yeah.
If you murder somebody, unless the case has been found to be it was accidental or something like that. Most of the time, they're tried as adults. I mean, there's a lot of argument to be made about why are you trying a child as an adult, but these are the examples as to why you do it.
Yeah, Craig Price.
Yeah.
He killed those 4 people, and it was like, and when I get out, I'm going to make history.
Yeah. And there is argument to be made like, hey, their decision-making skills are not developed. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand their actions, but you have to look at it from the victim's perspective. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome, but you've killed a parent, you've killed a family member, you've killed a child.
Right, and he went on in prison to just prove his point. He was incredibly violent
Yeah.
and continued his assault on people.
So I generally don't have sympathy for kid murderers. As somebody who is in the juvenile justice system, I have a lot of sympathy for kids who are from bad areas, who do things like petty crime, stuff like that. But when you hit killing, everybody, even the most base person, like, knows killing somebody is not right.
Yeah. Especially the two who killed the 4-year-old.
Yeah, that shit was fucked.
Yeah, they spent hours
Yep, that was
torturing
fucked.
and killing him.
Yep.
At
Yeah.
any point, they had no empathy.
At some point, your sympathy for what their development has to go out the window, because there's just, at that point, it's not you're developmentally behind. It's there's something seriously wrong with you.
I also picked these and not newer ones because I don't want to hear the violent video games. This was before all that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This was before it.
And there is a lot of like studies that show violent video games might perpetuate a little bit of it, but it's very short term, and there's a lot worse you see out there.
Well, one of the ones I was looking at was a kid who had gone into his classroom and killed a teacher and some students before he was outsmarted by the gym teacher. He was dressed like a Wild West outlaw, and he quoted Stephen King, I think from Carrie, where it's Rage.
Rage, yeah.
Where he said, "This is much more fun than algebra," or something along those lines. So it's like, but does it contribute to it, or does it just become like an
obsession?
anthem? Because I think it doesn't make me want to kill people.
No.
And I read a lot of horror shit, but I have never once thought, you know what, I'd like to do that myself.
And a lot of it is like people find horror and the video games, they find it cathartic.
Yeah.
Like it's
A release.
an outlet.
Yeah.
It's almost an outlet for any sort of frustration you have in a very minor setting versus like pent up rage and stuff. Like, I mean, the kid who was in like the girl from 1967, she was not playing video games.
No.
She had a very shitty upbringing. That's what brought along a lot of this.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big proponent that people don't, I mean,
she dissociated. She
Yeah.
had no empathy because she didn't even know what it was.
Yeah.
well, and that's why people, you study like developmental psychology and stuff like that. They talk about nature versus nurture. I don't think there's anything called nature versus nurture. I think it's nature and or nurture.
Yeah.
So you can have it both ways. You can have it one way, but
Yeah.
if you grow up, and I mean, I'm sure there's people who are horrible, who have murdered people, who have loving upbringings, but the trend that you see is people who have had shitty upbringings.
Yep.
And that's honestly why I never wanted to become a parent. I just didn't want to risk it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair.
I don't want to risk that I'm going to beat a kid because it's what I know.
Well,
I don't want to risk it. What if
Yeah,
I just
fair.
lose my shit? I've
Well-
seen myself play video games.
Yes.
And funny, I was listening to a podcast. It was a woman and her wife, and she was talking about her biggest fear is that she's just going to raise an asshole regardless of how well she raises him.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fear that most parents have. I don't believe that the majority of kids are bad, but as somebody who sees like both
The
sides,
worst,
I see
yeah.
the worst of it. I think people don't realize what the world is like.
Yeah.
It's very
And I
much
don't think
bubbled.
we're all qualified to be parents.
Nope.
Like,
No.
I know plenty of people that shouldn't be parents.
Exactly.
And yet they have kids. And you're like, why would you even have kids?
I think the mature, conscious decision, like, of people who are like, I know I don't want to have kids and I'm not going to risk it, like what Bobby did. That's mature. That's a mature reaction, regardless of whether people are like, you never know if you're going to want to have kids, blah, blah, blah. Like, if you in your heart of heart knows that you are not meant to be a parent,
Yeah.
good on you
Don't
for not
question
doing
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like there was a point in my life I wanted to be a parent, but I'm also like, I think if you're going to have a kid, you need to sit down and think about it. This shouldn't be like, oh, we had a wild night of sex and here's some, herpader.
Yeah. His name is Herpader.
Don't have that wild night of sex until you know that you're prepared for a kid.
wear a fucking
financially, emotionally, mentally.
Yeah.
Let me preface this that, like, the majority of kids I see right now, because that could change very quickly by Monday, most of them are remorseful. They do come from good families. A lot of them do stupid shit like, I went into Lizard Thicket and stole some earrings.
To be fair, though, those prices are ridiculous.
They are.
For that garbage quality shit.
I know. You stole $12.95 and you stole like half of an earring. It's like, what the fuck? But I think these are good learning lessons for kids to be able to go to court and learn, like, hey, this is what happens. These are your ramifications.
And it's completely different than I came off the top rope on an infant.
Yes, absolutely.
I read Mysterio of that motherfucking child.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like,
Showed her.
Well, I think that's where the lines of the law should really think about it. Is it's like, I understand juvenile justice reform. I understand the idea of helping rehabilitate children who you can see can be rehabilitated. But the idea that you have laws that protect children who murder, that's the one benefit of being in Georgia, because that does not exist.
Yeah.
And it sucks because you want to hold parents responsible, but parents aren't always responsible.
No.
But so you can't make just a generic law like parents are responsible for shit their kids do because they're not always.
Right. And sometimes it's just...
Like this lady who fucking stayed upstairs hearing the screams of a kid being murdered. Like, you need your ass in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, it never said anything about her. Maybe because I was researching the kid and not the mom, but I don't remember anything about that.
Well, I'm sure
she was charged for neglect.
Yeah.
She had to be.
Or some sort of...
Jinx.
Well, hey, I was going to say, or some sort of defects, but hey, one of your kids is in jail and the other one's dead. So, I mean, there's not much defects can do at that point.
Yep.
But it's like the parents with the truant kids. Maybe they were trying to.
Yeah.
But like, how much responsibility does the school have to not report it? But then, are the police responsible because they didn't go find them? Or is it just the kids responsible?
Well, in truancy law, and it's funny now, truancy laws are so strict. It's like they probably could have figured out who these kids were pretty much immediately by their truancy like stuff. But I mean, and the thing that you see here is like a lot of these cases, it feels like they've perpetuated the laws to grow and evolve based on what's happening. I mean, as much as we are a reactive society with what happens to these people, at least we learn from it. And I think
at
that's
least
good.
we don't execute 14-year-olds without proper evidence.
True.
Actually, I don't think we execute 14-year-olds at all anymore.
No, we're not allowed to. I mean, literally, the law was children cannot be facing the death penalty. And now the law is children cannot face life without parole. Like, you can only get life with a possibility of parole.
No, there was this one kid I didn't put on here because there wasn't really anything legal that I could trace, but it was this kid in India. And he was so evil, he killed over 90 people. By the time he was 9 years old.
Jesus.
And they're like, what do we do with him? Because kids are, like, held sacred.
Yeah.
Like,
And, you know, and like...
It's like, he's killed 90 people, you put his ass down.
And that's an interesting perspective, too, because, you know, in certain places, there's a minimum age requirement to prosecute because they don't believe that children can form the requisite criminal intent to do it. So what do you do with that kid?
Yeah.
You stick him in an asylum and just leave him there for the rest of his life?
It's like the 5-year-old I was looking at who killed, and they're like, well, she didn't know what she was doing. Like, yeah, she did. She did.
Well,
she strangled him, hit him, stabbed him. And where are the parents? How did she get a knife?
Yep.
Well, that's when those hypotheticals start kicking in. Like, okay, so yes, she knew what she was doing, but did she understand that she criminally was intending to do it? Like, that's this whole... I mean, I spent a long time in law school arguing about this.
Well, it turned out that she was the one with the dissociative...
personality disorder.
Had no emotions at all. On any level. She felt attached to nothing.
So, the end of this is the best thing to do is hopefully make sure these kids get to 17 and 18 so they can be tried as adults because there's no arguments there.
And truly consider eugenics.
I mean...
The best of us should procreate.
But even if the best of us procreate, I mean...
There's no guarantees.
There's no guarantees.
Especially if two intelligent people get together. You could truly have, I almost said a socialist.
You might end up with a communist.
A sociopath, because truly high intelligence tends to strip away emotion.
So what you really need to do is... I almost said marinate.
You need to marinate.
You need to make a dumb person and an intelligent person so you just get an average person.
Well, I knew this family that was so inbred. There was a mentally handicapped guy, and he was enormous. He was, I mean, just huge. But he didn't even register 38. Like, he was an animal.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that, but that's legit what he was.
Yeah.
He just sat and drooled. He would defecate and urinate himself. And he was incredibly violent, randomly.
Yeah.
Just violent. And it was terrifying.
Yep.
Well, it goes to that intelligence factor we were
And he
talking
ended
about.
up raping a girl. So there's like these base primal instincts.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying.
Yeah. Well, man, I feel so happy today. This was like a really positive and uplifting episode.
So when you go out and look at kids and you're like, what fresh-faced kids? The 2 kids who killed the 4-year-old were adorable.
Yep. I'm gonna go home, ball up, and try not to cry.
Yeah.
This is when I'm like, okay, maybe we need to talk about Nibiru more.
Yeah. Well, and I want to look up what Bobby said, even though you said it was horrible. At the beginning, you said look up...
Toy box murders?
Yeah, the toy box murders.
Yeah, I think it's called Toy Box Murders. Yeah, it's fucked. It makes you real sad. But hey, Becky, on a positive note, where
can they find us?
Oh, God. You can find us in like an insane asylum because the world is burning. Anyways, you can find us on Facebook at The Free Rotation Podcast. We're also on Twitter at The Free Rotation. You can see us on Instagram at The Free Rotation Podcast. Spotify and all that. You can check us out streaming at The Free Rotation on Twitch. You can also check out our backlog on YouTube and at our website, TheFreeRotation.com for all of our backlogged episodes. It's all The Free Rotation Podcast mostly, y'all. We are affiliates of Weeby Geeks. Check out all the other great podcasts at WeebyGeeksPC.com. And yeah, sorry for making everything super depressing. Hopefully the next episode won't. I would talk about MK Ultra. That's not depressing. That's just funny.
No, it's fine. Okay. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.
You know what the best part of those kids rolled down their mom's thigh?
Free